The boardroom was silent, except for the sound of heavy breathing as John Miller's empire collapsed before his very eyes. The 35-year-old entrepreneur sat at the long glass table, his fists clenched, papers scattered across polished wood. His rival, Richard Hayes, smirked from the other side, whispering venom that echoed louder than thunder. John thought, how did it all come crashing down so fast? The investors stared coldly, their eyes filled with disappointment and betrayal. Emma Carter, his loyal confidant, placed a trembling hand on his arm and whispered, "John, you need to breathe." But breathing felt impossible when betrayal sat across the room. The deal was gone, the fortune evaporated, the trust shattered. Reporters outside the skyscraper lobby were already crafting headlines of his downfall. John's mind raced back to the $100 in his pocket that had started this dream, and now the same dream seemed to be choking him to death. He whispered to himself, "This is not the end. This is only the beginning." John stumbled out of the boardroom into the hallway, the muffled sounds of reporters echoing like a drumbeat in his skull. His mind screamed with questions, every step heavier than the last. Emma hurried beside him, her eyes full of worry as she whispered, "We can still fight this." But John's voice cracked. "How, Emma? They just ripped everything away." The marble hallway seemed endless, each step reflecting back a man who looked less like a CEO and more like a ghost. Memories of his father's words pierced through. "Son, money can vanish, but vision never dies." The words steadied him, a flicker of fire returning. He paused, turning to Emma, his face pale yet resolute. "I started this with $100, John said, and I'll build it back, even if I have to crawl." Emma's lips tightened into a faint smile, the first glimmer of hope in the storm. The elevator doors slid shut, trapping John in a mirrored box that reflected 1,000 versions of his broken self. His breath fogged the glass, the sound of his heartbeat pounding louder than the hum of the machinery. Emma stood beside him, silent but present, her gaze steady like an anchor. John whispered, "I can't let Richard win." Emma finally spoke, her voice firm. "Then don't. Use what he can't steal, your vision." The elevator descended slowly, every floor number glowing like a countdown to rebirth. For the first time that night, John's reflection seemed to shift. He straightened his shoulders, his eyes hardening with determination. "This isn't my funeral," he muttered. "This is my restart." The elevator bell chimed, and the doors slid open to a storm of cameras, flashes erupting like fireworks in the night. The lobby was chaos, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing, umbrellas dripping water onto polished floors. John raised his hand to shield his face, but the weight of their words pierced through. Bankrupt? Betrayed? Finished? Emma tried to guide him through the frenzy, but John stopped in his tracks. He turned, looked directly into the cameras, and for a split second, silence blanketed the storm. His voice rang out, "This is not the end. Watch me rise again." The room gasped, reporters scribbling furiously, flashes popping brighter. Emma whispered, "That's the fire they can't extinguish." John exhaled, the storm raging inside now tempered into purpose. John and Emma stepped out into the rain-soaked streets, the neon city glowing like a battlefield. Cars hissed by, their headlights casting fleeting shadows across his drenched suit. He tilted his head back, rain pelting his face, washing away sweat and fear. Emma opened her umbrella, shielding him, but he shook his head, whispering, "Let it pour." In that moment, the city didn't feel like his enemy. It felt like his proving ground. "I'll build again," John said firmly, voice rising above the storm. "And this time nothing, not betrayal, not failure, not Richard, will stop me." Emma's hand slipped into his, their silhouettes illuminated by neon red and blue light. The night was cold, but John's fire burned brighter. The next morning, John sat in his cramped apartment, rain still dripping from the fire escape outside, a sharp contrast to the skyscrapers where he once commanded power. He stared at the $100 bill he had framed on the wall, the symbol of his humble beginning. Emma brewed coffee in the corner, her movement steady, as if routine could hold the chaos together. John whispered, "Funny how this paper built an empire, and now mocks me." Emma handed him a mug, her voice soft but steady. "It's not mocking you, John. It's reminding you what's possible." His eyes darkened with memories of the long nights, the rejection letters, the hunger that burned fiercer than his stomach. He pressed the bill against the glass, whispering to himself, "I didn't come this far just to quit." The world had knocked him down, but the fire that once fueled him flickered back to life in that small apartment. Later that day, John walked through the bustling streets of the city, his reflection flashing in every glass window, reminding him of what he'd lost. Street vendors called out, the smell of roasted peanuts and rain mixing in the air. Emma kept pace beside him, holding a folder stuffed with their last remaining plans. John muttered, "Everyone looks at me like I'm finished." Emma snapped, "Then stop looking at them. Look forward." They paused in front of a towering billboard advertising Richard Hayes' company. The smirking face of his rival plastered 10 stories high. John's fists clenched, and his jaw set firm. "That's not victory," he growled. "That's arrogance on borrowed time." Emma watched him, seeing not a broken man but the spark of a fighter returning. The city didn't just feel like noise anymore, it felt like fuel. That evening, John met his old mentor, Samuel Grant, in a dimly lit diner at the edge of the city. Samuel, a gray-haired man in his late 60s, stirred his coffee slowly, his eyes sharp despite his age. John leaned forward, voice heavy. "I lost everything, Samuel. They left me with nothing but shame." Samuel raised an eyebrow and said, "Nothing? You've got your mind, your vision, your fire. That's worth more than gold." John clenched his jaw, fighting back frustration. "Vision doesn't pay rent." Samuel leaned closer, his tone cutting. "No, but it builds empires. Stop chasing pity, John. Start chasing purpose again." The words hit harder than any loss. Emma squeezed John's shoulder, silent but firm. For the first time since the collapse, John's eyes glimmered with something more than despair. They carried the weight of determination. Back at his apartment, John pinned a large piece of paper on the wall, scrawling bold words across it. "Rebuild." His handwriting was jagged, the ink smearing as if anger fueled the strokes. Emma placed folders and notes across the table, her organized chaos grounding his storm. "We start small," she said firmly. John nodded. "Small is where I began. $100, that's enough to remind me who I am." He stared at the word until it burned into his mind, the letters glowing brighter than neon outside. He remembered the hunger, the long nights, the ridicule. He whispered, "If I built it once, I can build it again." Emma met his gaze, her steady voice wrapping around his fury. "Then let's make it unbreakable this time." The following morning, John stood in front of a small group of loyal employees who had gathered in a modest co-working space. Their faces were tired, uncertain, but filled with flickers of belief. John's voice cracked at first, but then grew stronger. "I know I failed you. I know we've been broken, mocked, and written off. But hear me clearly. This is not the end. We will rise because we're not just building a company. We're building proof that dreams can't be stolen." Silence filled the room, the words hanging heavy. Then, slowly, one employee clapped, followed by another, until the sound of applause drowned the doubt. Emma watched from the corner, her eyes shining with pride. For the first time, John didn't just feel like a survivor. He felt like a leader reborn. Weeks passed, and John's small team worked from dawn until midnight in their modest co-working space, fueled by nothing but determination and cheap takeout. Every day felt like a test of endurance. Bills piled high, servers crashed, and investors ignored their calls. John's voice often trembled with frustration. "Why won't anyone believe in us?" Emma answered, steady but strained, "Because they don't see what we see, yet." Still, doubt gnawed at him in the quiet hours, whispering of failure. His father's voice echoed like a ghost, urging him to rise. One night, after another server failure, John punched the table and shouted, "We're not quitting! We can't!" The team froze, then nodded, fire rekindling. Even in chaos, John's spirit pushed them forward. The financial pressure grew unbearable. John sat across from a bank officer, his suit threadbare, his palms sweating. The officer shook his head without sympathy. No collateral, no loan. You're too risky. John's jaw tightened, rage bubbling beneath his calm tone. Risk is the only thing that creates change, he snapped. Emma placed a hand on his knee under the table, whispering, "Save your fire for building." Walking out, John's chest felt hollow, the rejection weighing heavier than stone. But as the cold wind hit him outside the bank, his eyes sharpened with defiance. He muttered, "If the system won't back me, I'll build my own." That night, John returned home to find his mother waiting in the small living room. Ann Miller, mid-60s, frail but sharp-eyed, folded her arms tightly. "John," she said with a trembling voice, "you're chasing ghosts. This dream will ruin you." John froze, every word cutting deep. "Mom, this is my life. I can't stop now." Her eyes watered, filled with fear and love. "You've lost everything once already. I can't watch you destroy yourself." Emma stepped forward, her voice steady. "He's not destroying himself. He's fighting to build something that matters." Anne shook her head, whispering, "I wish I could believe." John clenched his fists, whispering, "One day you will." The silence that followed was heavier than any storm. A week later, disaster struck. A trusted colleague, Michael Reed, who had once been John's partner in late-night brainstorming sessions, suddenly walked out. The team discovered he had sold confidential information to Richard Hayes' company. John's chest burned as Emma showed him the leaked documents. "He betrayed us," she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. John's eyes filled with rage. Michael was family. How could he? His words echoed through the room like thunder. Silence fell as the team absorbed the blow, their faith shaken. John pounded the table and declared, "If betrayal couldn't break me before, it won't now. We fight harder." But deep inside, the cut bled slow and painful. John faced his team, their eyes uncertain, their energy drained. He paced the floor, his voice rising with raw intensity. "They think we're finished. They think betrayal and rejection will end us. But let me tell you something. Every empire in history was built by those who refused to quit. We will work harder, smarter, fiercer. And when we rise, they'll regret ever doubting us." The room vibrated with his words. Emma nodded, her expression fierce. Slowly the team's heads lifted, determination returning like embers catching fire. John raised his fist high and shouted, "This is where we fight back!" The roar of his team answered him, shaking the walls of their fragile workspace. John's phone buzzed with an anonymous message late one night. "Meet me at the pier. Midnight. You need to know the truth." The words burned into his mind, suspicious yet irresistible. Emma begged him to ignore it, her voice sharp with fear. "John, it's a trap." He shook his head, determination etched across his face. "If there's truth to be found, I can't hide from it." The night air was bitter as he walked alone toward the fog-covered pier, each step echoing like a drumbeat of fate. Shadows stretched long under flickering lampposts, the city a distant blur behind him. His chest tightened with both dread and hope, unsure if the next hour would save him or shatter him forever. At the end of the pier stood Michael Reed, the former colleague who had betrayed them. His face was pale, eyes darting nervously, as if hunted by his own guilt. John's fists clenched, fury igniting instantly. "You sold us out," he growled, each word dripping venom. Michael raised his hands, trembling. "I had no choice, John. Hayes has been pulling every string. He owns judges, regulators, even the press. He threatened my family." John's chest heaved, torn between rage and pity. Michael's voice cracked. "You were never fighting just a rival. You've been at war with a machine." The truth hit John harder than any betrayal. Richard Hayes wasn't just a competitor. He was a puppeteer, and John had been trapped in his web all along. Emma burst onto the pier, her breath ragged, eyes wide with panic. "John, step away. You can't trust him," she shouted, her voice slicing through the fog. John turned, torn between the woman who stood beside him through everything and the man who now begged for redemption. Michael's voice trembled. I have proof, John. Documents, recordings, everything Hayes has done to crush you. If you don't expose him, he'll bury you alive. Emma glared at Michael with fire. And why should we believe the liar who already sold us out? John stood frozen, the weight of betrayal and possibility crushing him from both sides. For the first time, he didn't know who he could trust, not even his own judgment. Michael shoved a flash drive into John's palm, his hand shaking uncontrollably. This has everything. Hayes isn't just sabotaging you, he's sabotaging the industry. Take him down, John. Do what I couldn't. John stared at the small piece of plastic as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. Emma's voice cracked with urgency. Don't trust it, he could be setting you up again. Michael's eyes filled with tears, desperation breaking him. I ruined everything I touched. Let me at least make this right. John's pulse raced, his heart torn between revenge and survival. Slowly, he slid the drive into his coat pocket, whispering to himself, if this is a trap, I'll burn with it. But if it's truth, Hayes is finished. The three stood in silence, the waves slapping against the pier like a metronome counting down to war. John's gaze shifted from Emma's fierce loyalty to Michael's broken plea, then out into the endless fog. The truth had cracked the world he thought he knew. Hayes wasn't just a rival. He was a predator with roots in every shadow. John's voice cut through the night, steady and sharp. Then we're not just rebuilding. We're fighting back against a monster. Emma stepped closer, her hand slipping into his, grounding him in the storm. Michael lowered his head, broken yet relieved, whispering, then finish what I started. The fog swallowed them whole, but within John, fire erupted brighter than ever before. John sat in the dim light of his apartment, the flash drive on the table before him, glowing like a loaded weapon. Emma paced behind him, her voice taut with worry. If this is real, Hayes will come after us with everything he has. John's eyes didn't move from the drive. He already has. Now it's our turn. He plugged it into his laptop, and files exploded onto the screen. Bribes, forged contracts, rigged deals. Emma gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. John's jaw hardened, his breath slow and sharp. This isn't just a fight for my company. It's a fight for every person Hayes crushed to feed his empire. The choice was before him. Stay quiet and survive, or go to war and risk everything. He whispered, I'm done surviving. I'm fighting. The next day, John marched into a glass-walled office tower to confront Hayes. Emma trailed behind, clutching a folder of evidence. Hayes stood at the head of a sleek boardroom, his smug grin untouched by fear. You look tired, John, he sneered. Failure doesn't suit you. John slammed the folder onto the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. This is your empire, lies, bribes, corruption. And I'm done being silent. Hayes' smirk faltered, but only slightly. Evidence means nothing when the system belongs to me. John leaned closer, his voice low but lethal. Then I'll break your system. The tension thickened, a battlefield without bullets, but deadlier than any war. Hayes leaned back, feigning calm, but his eyes betrayed unease. You think you can destroy me with paper? He scoffed. John's voice thundered across the room. Paper built this empire, and paper will bury you. He pushed forward the damning files, images of Hayes' secret accounts, and bribed officials spilling across the table. Emma's hand pressed firmly on John's arm, grounding his fury. Hayes snarled, his mask cracking. You're making enemies you can't fight. John's reply was sharp as steel. No. I'm exposing one who's already lost. The room was electric, silence buzzing louder than words, as Hayes realized his empire was beginning to crumble. As John left the building, reporters swarmed the lobby, microphones thrust at him like weapons. Flashes erupted, voices clamoring for answers. Emma squeezed his hand, whispering, This is your moment. John stopped, turned to the sea of cameras, and spoke with unshakable fire. Richard Hayes built his empire on corruption, and I have the proof. I won't stop until every lie is dragged into the light. Gasps rippled, Pens scribbled, and shutters clicked furiously. In that instant, John wasn't a disgraced CEO. He was a warrior. Emma's eyes glistened, whispering only for him, "That's the man I've believed in all along." That night, John stood alone on a rooftop overlooking the city, the wind whipping his coat, the skyline alive with lights. The weight of war pressed on him, but so did the fire of resolve. His voice carried into the night, as if speaking to the city itself. "They wanted me silent. They wanted me broken. But I'll fight until this empire of lies fall." Emma stepped quietly beside him, her hands slipping into his, their silhouettes against the neon sky. "You've already won," she whispered, "because you refused to bow." John exhaled deeply, eyes locked on the horizon. Tomorrow would bring battle, but tonight was the birth of a leader who chose war over surrender. The storm of headlines exploded across the city within hours of John's press statement. News anchors called it the scandal of the decade, Hayes' empire unraveling under public scrutiny. John sat quietly in the co-working space, exhaustion carved into his face as his team gathered around him, waiting for direction. Emma placed the morning paper in front of him. Hayes' face splashed across the front page, under the word corruption. John's voice was calm but heavy. "This isn't a victory yet. It's only the beginning of rebuilding." His employees exchanged looks, unsure whether to celebrate or fear what came next. Emma leaned closer, her voice steady. "They finally see the truth. Now it's time to show them the future." As Hayes faced subpoenas and public outrage, John found himself pulled into interviews and conferences, his once broken reputation slowly transforming into a symbol of resilience. In one interview, a reporter asked, "What kept you fighting when everyone counted you out?" John smiled faintly, his voice carrying quiet fire, "Because failure is only permanent if you let it be. I had $100 once, and I built an empire. If I have nothing, I can still build again." The crowd erupted into applause, not for a business pitch, but for a man who refused to bow. Emma, watching from the sidelines, whispered proudly, "They don't see a CEO anymore. They see a leader." Yet, even with momentum on his side, the weight of rebuilding bore down on John. Late one night, he sat alone in his office, blueprints and charts spread across his desk. The city lights glowed through the window, a reminder of both opportunity and risk. His mother's voice lingered in his memory, warning him of self-destruction. He whispered to the empty room, "Am I leading them to greatness or to ruin again?" Emma appeared silently in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. She set one beside him and said softly, "You're not carrying this alone anymore." John met her gaze, exhaustion softening into gratitude. For the first time, the future didn't feel like his burden alone. Weeks later, John and Emma unveiled their reborn company at a small but packed launch event. The stage was modest, the banners simple, yet the energy in the room pulsed with anticipation. John addressed the crowd, his voice steady. "We're not here to chase money. We're here to chase impact, to prove that integrity can build something stronger than greed ever could." Applause thundered, echoing louder than any boardroom rejection. The employees behind him stood taller, no longer uncertain but proud. Emma's smile was radiant, her eyes never leaving John's face. In that moment, the collapse that once defined him transformed into the foundation of something unbreakable. That night, after the launch, John stood outside the building, the city humming with life around him. The rain had cleared and stars blinked faintly above the skyscrapers. Emma joined him, slipping her hand into his, both of them gazing at the skyline. "Do you feel it?" she asked quietly. John nodded, his voice low but firm. "It's not about winning anymore. It's about building something worth leaving behind." Emma leaned her head against his shoulder, her voice soft. "And you've already started." The night no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a promise. John smiled faintly, knowing the fight had changed him, but it had also defined him. Months later, John returned to the same boardroom where his empire had first collapsed. This time, the air felt different. Investors leaned forward, listening with respect instead of suspicion. John's voice carried steady power. What began with $100 became an empire once. But this time, it won't just be about profit. It will be about impact. Emma watched from the side, her eyes glistening with pride, remembering the man who once stumbled out of this same room broken. John finished with quiet conviction. I fell, but I rose again. And this time I won't fall alone. We rise together. Applause thundered, not forced, but genuine. The boardroom that had been his tomb now felt like his throne. Outside the media waited, but the tone had shifted. Reporters called John a visionary instead of a fallen CEO. Flashbulbs sparked as he stepped into the lobby, Emma by his side. A reporter shouted, "How does it feel to come back from the edge of ruin?" John smiled faintly, his answer crisp and sharp. "Failure taught me what success never could, that true power is refusing to surrender." Cameras clicked furiously, every angle capturing his rebirth. Emma whispered, "They see you now, not as broken but unbreakable." John nodded, his eyes fixed beyond the chaos, toward the horizon. He wasn't walking into fame. He was walking into legacy. Later that evening, John visited his mother's modest home. Ann Miller opened the door, her frail frame trembling as she embraced him. Tears streaked her cheeks as she whispered, "I was wrong. You didn't destroy yourself. You became stronger." John held her tightly, his voice breaking. "I had to prove it to myself first, Mom, and then to the world." She cupped his face with wrinkled hands, pride radiating from her weary eyes. Emma stood in the background, smiling softly, knowing this was the victory that mattered most. For John, success wasn't just wealth or headlines anymore. It was validation, healing, and love. John stood once again with his team in their co-working space, which now buzzed with new energy. Desks overflowed with laptops, prototypes, and sketches. He addressed them, voice steady but passionate. "We were broken once, but it was in the breaking that we found our strength. We're not building for survival anymore. We're building for greatness." Emma stepped forward, adding, "And this time, every one of you is part of that legacy." The employees erupted in cheers, their faith restored, their eyes lit with fire. For John, this wasn't a company anymore. It was a movement. That night, John returned to the rooftop where he once vowed to fight. The city glittered below, neon and stars merging into one endless horizon. Emma stood beside him, hand in his, her voice soft. "You did it, John. You rose again." John gazed over the skyline, a faint smile curving his lips. "No, Emma," he said, voice firm but gentle. "We did it, and we're just getting started." The wind swept around them, carrying his words into the night. His journey had begun with a single $100 bill, but now it carried the weight of a multi-million-dollar empire, built not just on money, but on resilience, betrayal, love, and unbreakable vision.